Security guard here. When you work in security, you might get moved around a lot. Normally I work night shifts, and I'm a regular in one building. I've recently been put in charge of reading over the site logs for other buildings too. It's pretty boring most of the time, but I got $1 per hour pay rise out of it, so I can hardly complain. All a site log is a registry of everything that happened on a particular shift. It's normally just patrols, maybe a bit of damage a guard has noticed, or maybe a kid hanging about here or there. Nothing too exciting. A few things make a log more difficult to get through. Fucking terrible penmanship is the worst one. But another issue is that many guards don't speak or write great English, and it's difficult for them to concisely explain events. We learn to get by with guesswork. One guy was always hard to understand. His name was Sa. He was African and a good guard, but even in person it was a struggle to understand him. And forget about reading his reports. They were always a headache, but I liked the bloke and managed them well enough as I could. Sa mostly worked the night at one particular office building. Nowhere special, just a regular place with cubicles and drinking fountains and people who hated their jobs. It was pretty cushy though. He had a booth office all to himself with heating and a radio and cameras of high enough quality that patrols were not necessary. He just had to chill in the booth and keep one eye on the monitors. After about 4 days, Sa started noting a problem in his reports. Every time I read through them, it said the same thing. 2000, on-site all okay. 2200, meal break. 2300, speak button scratch again. 205, hallway again. 300, hallway gone. 800, Sa off duty. After seeing this in a report a few times, I called Sa to get some clarification. First I asked him about speak button scratch. I told him that every night, scratch on the speak button back door. He told me that every night, scratch on the speak button back door. I asked him if he meant the intercom around the back of the building. Yes, every night scratch noise, very bad. I figured he meant that the intercom was playing up, probably picking up some kind of static. I made a note to report it and get it fixed. I asked him about hallway again. He was quiet for some time. What's wrong with the hallway, Sa? Hallway camera, every night, something same time. What something? What do you mean? Camera getting big black spot. It's moving up camera hallway. Like dirt on the camera? No. Moving spot. Arms and legs. Something inside. Okay, it sounds like some kind of distortion. It could be messing up when people walk down the hallway. I'll report it. First day 1 camera. Now 2 camera, a closer hallway. Sa was starting to confuse me and I was tired. I decided to just request a tech to look at all the cameras. I told him I would get it sorted out. I'm pretty sure the tech went out the next day, but when I got the night report, it said the same. Speak button scratch, hallway again. This went on a couple more days, until my night off, about 6 PM. My boss calls me. Sa didn't show up for work. He needs me to go in and cover. I'm relatively familiar with that particular building, and I could use the money, so I went in. I started the night off by looking over the night before report. I hadn't seen it yet, and it would save me doing it later. Sa had been working. 2000, Sa on site. 2200, meal break. 2300, speak button scratch, whisper. 205, hallway again, 3 camera closer. 800, no more, Sa off duty. The logbook is spotted with drops of water, and Sa had dug the pen in so hard on the last few sentences that it ripped the paper. I'm concerned and I call his mobile. He answers. No shift, he says immediately. No more work, another building. We can move you, Sa. I can handle this place for a bit. Sa is quiet again. You are there tonight? Yes, Sa, I can cover your shifts. He hangs up. I try to call back, baffled, and thinking his phone must have cut out or something. He doesn't answer. I decided to talk to my boss about it tomorrow. I settle in with my snacks, a book, and all of Reddit to browse over the long shift. My phone buzzes. It's a text from Saw. Go home. That's it. Nothing else. I try to call him again, but he doesn't pick up. I'm a little concerned for his health and thinking he's had some kind of breakdown or maybe he's sleep deprived. It happens a lot when you do such long, late shifts. We try to be vigilant about it. Again, I decide it's just best to bother the boss with it tomorrow and settle in. It's been a few easy hours. Nothing much has happened. The building has emptied out, the cleaners had finished, and the underappreciated cubicle staff had finally done enough unpaid overtime. I get to be as chill as I can now. The intercom rings. It won't be staffed at this hour. The building is right in the city, so it's probably just stupid teenagers out late and playing silly buggers. I click the speak button. Can I help you? Nothing. Hello? Scratching. Soft scratching like somebody running their nails slightly over the speaker. It sounds nothing like static. I figure it's just some weird fault and hang up. When I log it, I notice it's 11 p.m. The exact same time Saw experienced the issue. This actually reassures me. Everything in the booth is connected in our timer system, so that the system knows when to auto-lock doors and arm alarms, etc. If it always happens at the same time, it's probably just a technical glitch. I note it all down and go back to looking at pictures of cats. I remind myself to look closely at the cameras at 2 a.m. to see if they're still faulting too. The time comes. I'm staring at the monitors looking for anything abnormal. I see nothing at first. Then I caught it. Hallway cam 001. It's in the hallway that leads down from the rear door to the front lobby of the building, where my booth is located. The hallway has 3 cameras along it because it has several sharp corners. There's also a PTZ, a pan tilt zoom. You can control these kinds of cameras with a joystick and look around. At first it looked like a bug or something on the screen, just a little dark smudge. Slowly it starts growing. Not growing, moving forward. The black smudge. It moves closer and closer to the camera. It moves very slowly. It's so indistinct, I have no idea what it could be. I watch it get slowly closer to the first turn in the hallway. After an hour, it moves out of hallway 001's field of view. I look over to hallway camera 002. Nothing. I'm not the panicky type. I didn't hear a thing, no alarms or trigger, and cameras do weird shit sometimes. I decide it has to be some kind of fault. I pull the footage from hallway 001 and rewind it back to 205. The black smudge is there. I played back and forth a few times, but can see nothing else. I extract the footage and put it on the desktop. I figure I can show it to the techs when I call them back to actually fix this shit. The rest of the night is uneventful. I get some reading done and OD on Red Bull. Come 8 a.m, my relief shows up. I hang back 10 minutes for the building manager to come in too. I tell him we need the techs back out to look at the intercom and the hallway camera. I pull up the footage to show him. There's no smudge. The hallway looks normal. Just an hour-long recording of nothing. I don't understand. I played back the footage fine that night. It was there only hours ago. I will explain it a lot to the BM. Maybe you ripped the vision from the wrong date, or maybe you named it wrong. This stuff happens. I'll still get the text in and we will sort it out. I decide to blame it on tiredness and head home to bed. I had another shift that night in the same building. I slept and came back at 8, and went through all the same motions. 11 p.m. came, the intercom buzzed. Scratching again, only louder this time and more insistent. I was confused and maybe a little scared. The techs were meant to have fixed this for sure. It occurred to me that it might be the work of some dedicated pranksters. I pressed the talk button. You kids better run off. I don't have a problem calling the police. The scratching stopped. I figured I had solved that mystery, and I went back to killing time. 2 a.m. came. I didn't immediately look at the cameras this time. Why bother staring at a glitch, if it was even still playing up? A few minutes in, the movement still caught my eye. I looked up at hallway 001. The smudge was back. It seemed to move a bit faster this time. I watched it glide down hallway 001. It left the first camera's line of sight again. I figured that it was for another night. It wasn't. Hallway 002 flickered with motion. The smudge was there, and now I felt uncomfortable. The PTZ's line of sight stretched to hallway 002, so I decided to use it, and I swung it around in the direction of the smudge. It was there. A lump formed in my throat, and my stomach felt heavy. What the fuck was that? Part of me wanted to get up, leave the booth and look down the hallway, try to make sense of this. The other part of me said, fuck that. I twisted the top of the PTZ joystick, engaging the zoom function, and I zoomed in to the smudge. My stomach leapt into my throat. I tasted bile and lost my breath. The smudge was deep blackness, but it flickered with something. I looked closer. I was shaking like a leaf, but I didn't want to look away from the thing on screen. It had arms and legs and faces, not in any logical places, and not all showing up at any one time. Just flickers of limbs and eyes moving at incredible speeds, almost vibrating. I couldn't comprehend it. My brain just emptied itself and rejected what I was looking at. I felt frozen in place staring at that thing. I don't know how long I stared, as it came closer and closer to the end of hallway 002. Closer to me. I reached the end of hallway 002, and suddenly I was aware again. I felt movement come back to my limbs, and I sprung up and locked the door to my booth. I sat low in a corner, hidden from outside view. I clutched my phone and I stared at hallway 003, and I waited for that impossible thing to show up on the screen. It didn't. I looked at the time, 3 a.m. It was gone. I studied every camera. Nothing. I couldn't bring myself to go over that footage again. I just sat at the desk wondering what to do. Who do you call for something like that? Am I going crazy? Maybe I'm sleep deprived now. It was 8 a.m. again, and before I knew it, I only tore myself away from my thoughts as the sun started shining on my face through the glass front door. It made me feel safe. Whatever that thing was, whether it's real or not, it was coming closer. I'm supposed to work again tonight. What should I do? You meet such interesting people on a gas station graveyard shift. I mean, generally you don't. It's a half-truth. There's definitely a higher proportion of weird or scary fuckers than a normal retail shift. But after a couple months on the job, you learn all the archetypes. The dead, tired norms on their way home, the herds of teenagers on a candy binge, the meth heads who waste their entire month of food stamps on junk, the wine moms, the 24-hour gym rats, the alcoholics on bikes because of their DUI who panhandle $2 for a malt liquor. It doesn't take long to see it all, and I've been there for years. Long enough to see what I call interesting. Even when your threshold for abnormality is off the chart, you still end up with stories of the inexplicable or unnerving. I'll start with the latter. One autumn night, a man and a boy about 9 came in around 3 a.m. I yell a half-hearted greeting and barely glance towards them before going back to my phone. The boy makes a slow, cautious walk towards the candy aisle, while the dad makes a beeline to the beer coolers. I can tell by his body language he's somewhere on the scale between unfriendly and angry. Shoulders forward, brisk stompy steps. I sigh, anticipating an argument I've had many times. Last call was at 2, I can't sell you that. He glances back at me, and moves wordlessly down the wall, selects a tea, and heads to the counter. The way he walks gives the impression he's going to punch me. I ready myself and try to disarm him with a monotone, "How are you doing?" He stares at me for an uncomfortable few seconds and says, "Pack of Marlboro Reds, please." Relieved he didn't start whining or bargaining about his beer, I turn my back to him and grab the cigarettes, and jump with a start at a yell of, "Jack, fucking hurry up, man." I turn back and look past him to see his son at the candy aisle. A 1,000-yard stare, not really trying to make a selection. The first real look I've had of him tells me that the tears he's fighting wouldn't be his first of the day. I ring in the smoke and tea and say nothing, hoping it will resolve itself. Dealing with the shit I see on a normal night, I've learned not to meddle. To no avail this time, as he tosses a grimy $10 bill for his incomplete purchase. And not 20 seconds after the first time, yells, "Jesus fucking Christ, come on!" That's enough to stop my interest in customer service. Graveyard is an interesting dynamic. Obviously, we're supposed to have the smiley, welcoming personality all clerks are expected to have. But also, I'm here alone and also need to give off an air of security. Cross certain lines and I stop being friendly. I say, "Hey, relax, okay?" in a low tone. He turned back to me with the same intensity with which he yelled and answered. "What was that?" "He can take 2 fucking minutes to pick the candy bar he wants. You're invalidating any points you score for buying him one by being a dick. You can shut the fuck up too." I tell him, we're done here. Grab his purchases out of his reach and push his money back towards him. As I do, I notice the bill has blood on it. Then I notice his knuckles on his right hand are bleeding. Old caked up blood still oozing. Now I'm sure this could get physical. I'm a solid 3 inches and probably 40 pounds larger than him. But who knows what crazy has in his pockets. Our brilliant company policy doesn't allow weapons, but I keep deterrents conveniently placed in reach. I position myself to grab the pry bar and tell him, "I bet your boy would like to leave now. He can keep the candy." He gives me the same long, unsettling stare and replies calmly, "I'll be right back." I didn't stick around to see what he had in mind. I ran and locked myself in the back office and dialed 911. I felt a little stupid describing a run-in with a guy who may just be an asshole. But I watched on the camera as he rummaged in the back seat. I described the car to the operator and she asked, "Did he have a little boy with him?" Before I was even off the call with him, I began to hear sirens, a lot of them. It took a few days and a few conversations with the police before I had the whole story. The response had been to an Amber Alert. Jack, Sr., tragically, had lost visitation rights to see his son at the boy's request. Not content with a simple kidnap, his ex-wife was found unrecognizably mutilated with a claw hammer. The wounds on his hands were splinters from her skull. This happened 6 hours drive from the store, and I was the first place they stopped. I try not to dwell on what might have happened if Jack had picked a chocolate in a timely manner. I used to work at a gas station, and weird things show up around 2 a.m. Alright, let me just try to recall this as best as I can. It happened a while back, and I try not to think about it more than I have to. For starters, I used to work in a gas station, but the title made that obvious enough, I guess. It wasn't a place in the middle of the city, but it wasn't out in the countryside either. It was one of those awkward in-between areas where mostly it's just low-end houses, fast food joints, and gas stations like the ones that hired me. The station was on a 2-lane road that wasn't far from a major highway, and we got a lot of people stopping in for gas who were on their way to the beach for the weekend, or just passing through on their way to the cities around us. This was typical of any gas station like the one I worked at. But you see, that was during normal hours. Once the sun went down, oh, that was when the fun really started. That was when all the freaks showed up. Late at night, all the shadier customers would show their repulsive faces. Drunks would stumble through the doors and keep on going right for the back wall, where we kept all the alcohol. Teenagers would slink in trying to buy cigarettes. I'd ID'd all of them, and some of the cards they showed me looked fake, and some didn't. To be honest with you, I didn't really care. If they wanted to wreck their health, it was their business. Potheads would wander in too, and load up on chips and ice cream. One time a guy shoplifted the store right in front of me around midnight. Then he walked outside, called the cops on himself, and just stood there in the parking area waiting for them to show up. I had followed him outside and I asked him what his deal was. He looked at me and said that he just wanted a place to sleep for the night. I hadn't expected that, but I told him that if he wanted to sell the story, that he should just keep running. That he did. He walked off the property and down the small road. I heard sirens not long after. But I suppose I should tell you about the big one. The fucker who made me quit that job. I have a tendency to ramble. Like I said, I try not to think too much about this guy. It was another graveyard shift. Another night of my life spent behind a cheap wooden counter. I was pissing my life away, but I was doing it for some money, so it was all good. And I was better off than most of the people who walked through those doors anyway. It was 2:20 a.m. or so. I remember staring at the clock in boredom, watching the 2 dots of the display tick on and off as it counted the seconds. That was when I heard the bell over the counter, and I looked up to gauge the person who just stepped into my little world. He was only a little over 5 feet tall, and looked like he could be 50 years old easily. His skin was rough and saggy. His arms and legs were dotted all over with tiny white hairs, matched by equally white hair which hung down in long realms from his head. It was scraggly and matted together. You know how hair gets if you don't take a shower for like 2 days. This guy looked like he spent 2 weeks without the good graces of any shampoo. He slowly walked his way to the counter, mechanically, like each step was a deliberate action. Finally, he made it over to me and he thumped his hands onto the counter for support. His hands were crisscrossed with varicose veins. They looked like cracks in a broken bottle. Lines of black grit ran underneath the edges of his fingernails. He finally opened his mouth to speak, and gave me a good view of his slimy yellow teeth. Fucking disgusting. He asked in a croaky voice where our bathroom was, and I just pointed sternly towards the back corner of the room. There was a little hallway which held the doors to the storage rooms and one small bathroom. He lumbered off in that general direction, and I silently thanked God that weirdo was out of my face. I heard the door click shut. Once again, I was by myself for the most part. The station was silent for 5 minutes, then 10, 15. It started to get weird. How long was this guy going to take in the bathroom? If this were a normal looking guy, I wouldn't have questioned it. But the man in there was anything but normal. At the 20-minute mark, I journeyed out from behind my counter towards the bathroom. I knocked on the door a couple times and asked if the guy needed any help. I heard a mumble from the other side saying that he was fine, but he didn't sound all that fine to me. I wasn't about to argue with him though, so I just walked back over to my counter and sat down in my chair. Another 10 minutes went by, and the guy still hadn't come out of the bathroom. I was getting agitated at that point. Eventually I started hearing a noise. At first I couldn't tell what it was, but it didn't take long to figure it out. I was hearing moaning. I started walking back to the bathroom once again. This time, I could tell as I neared the door that something definitely wasn't right. It sounded like the man was in pain, maybe even afraid. I knocked on the door once again, and for a while I didn't get a response. But eventually the man managed to choke out 2 simple words. Help me. His moaning was getting louder and turning to yelling. I started hearing banging coming from the inside of the bathroom. I could even feel it shake the floor just a little. I went for the knob, but of course the man had locked himself into the bathroom and hadn't gotten around to actually trying to unlock it. I was panicking a little at this point. I didn't know if this was just a bad case of the runs or something like that, or it was something more serious. I started to think that the latter was true, but there was a rancid stench that was beginning to make its way out of that damn bathroom. It could have just been some horrible diarrhea, I thought. I shouted at him to open the door. He had to unlock it if he wanted help, of course. But he wasn't listening to me. He started babbling about some nonsense about how he had to keep the door locked because he was only safe in that room. They were coming from him, he said. I kept shouting at him to unlock the door, but he was off on a horrible tangent about how they were coming for him and how they had finally figured him out. All the while, his slurred speech was punctuated by cries for help. He just kept shouting for help. I kept hearing banging. I was freaked out, and at that moment I didn't figure I had the time to call the cops or anything like that. The man's speech was trailing off, and he sounded like he was in a very bad way. I like to say that I didn't freak out, that I knew what to do and handled the situation in a respectful way. but I did none of that. I spent the next probably 5 minutes pacing in that little hallway, my hands pressed to my head in desperation while I tried to think of something, anything to do. The man's yelling and flailing had stopped. I noticed, and I was desperate to do something. Finally, I was struck with inspiration. I went into the storage room next to me, and I grabbed a rolling dolly that we used to move some of the heavier crates around. Then I rushed back into the hallway, and with all the 4-second muster, which must have been a lot thanks to adrenaline, I bashed the door wide open. The smell that hit me almost made me throw up right then and there. I dropped the rolling dolly and stumbled away from the room gagging. I almost fell over, but I steadied myself on a wine shelf. I had to take a moment to catch myself, and it felt like I was going insane. It really struck me then that I needed outside help. So I did what any sensible person would have done a while back. I called the police. I assumed the worst. The moment I saw the man, it looked like he was certainly dead. He was sprawled out on the tile floor, half-heartedly resting against the wall. His back was slumped down, curving in the space between the wall and the floor. His knuckles were bloody, and pockmarks in the wall, which were also licked with blood, made it obviously clear he'd been punching around. It was obvious enough where the smell was coming from. That bastard was sitting in a putrid film of brown liquid. Yes, he shit himself. He wasn't even on the toilets, for Christ's sake. Fucking hell. I was still on the line with the police, and I did my best to describe the scene to them. As much as I really didn't want to know what happened to that guy in the bathroom, I figured he could still need help. I announced to the operator that I was going back in. I held out hope that he was alive, but feared otherwise. I guess I really went back into that hallway just out of morbid curiosity more than anything else. I had to pull up my shirt and cover my face with it, to keep the smell from overpowering me. It didn't do too much to help. The guy had a yellowish powder all around his nose and mouth, as well as a little froth at the corner of his lips. His eyes were bloodshot and glazed over. I said to the operator that it looked like he overdosed on some drug. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to go outside for some fresh air. I was groggy and mortified and depressed. A man had just died next to me, for God's sake. At the most, I was out there for 5 minutes. I could already hear sirens when I stepped into the cool night breeze. Only 5 minutes. But here's the thing. Here's what really messed me up badly. When the police arrived, they asked me to show them where the incident had occurred. An ambulance was there as well, and the paramedics were getting their equipment. I led them all to the back, and it smelled horrible. There were still punch marks on the wall, and there was still some of that drug powder dusted around the floor. But the man who's been laying there was gone. He was just fucking gone, like he hadn't even been there. I don't mean he was gone in the sense that he got up and left. There weren't any boot prints, no streaks of liquid on the floor, no handprints on the walls. There was none of that. It was like he just vanished. I can't explain it. I don't want to know what happened that night. I quit a few days later. I couldn't keep going back there, not after all that. You know, the things that guy said kept replaying in my head. All those things about how they were coming for him. God help me.